The last section of today's session is entitled Art of the World's Religions, and it's really a way of doing a comparative study of different power blocks and the religious ideology, and therefore iconography, that unify them. They're not listed chronologically, as that would have read firstly Hindu, stemming as it does from the older Vedic traditions from around 1700 BC. That would have been followed by Buddhism from the life of Siddhartha Gautama in the 5th century BC, then Christian from the 1st century AD, and finally Islam from the 7th century AD. They're listed here in terms of the order you would have encountered them historically, travelling eastward from Europe in the Middle Ages. However, I'll deal with Buddhism this evening before looking at Hinduism because of the influence of the former on the latter. Why religion? Well, there's little doubt that art and the religious are linked, both in terms of their preoccupation with the transcendent, either the idea of transcending the ordinary or everyday through a system of reflection, or, more specifically, art sometimes has a transcendental preoccupation with the infinite. But also, art and religions are inherently linked because the infrastructure of patronage has been, for millennia, dominated by religions. All of them have their deities, the exception being some forms of Buddhism, and they all have their founding teachers or leaders. They've all splintered into different schools with differing canonical choices of texts. The different churches of Christianity are probably familiar to you. In Islam, the minority Shia sect, the Shi'atu Ali, the party of Ali, that's Muhammad's son-in-law, relates to the wars of succession on the death of Muhammad. The fate of the Jewish sect Christianity is inextricably linked to the permutations of the Roman Empire. Early Islam is linked with the conquest by Muhammad and the successive caliphates in Mecca, the Rashidun Caliphate, then in Damascus, the Umayyad, and after that in Baghdad, the Abbasids. Hinduism blends with Buddhism, but is finally subdued by Islamic invasion of the Indian subcontinent. So let's start with Christianity. What might have remained a second temple Jewish sect spread to the Gentiles thanks to the conversion of the Roman citizen Saul or Paul, and in addition to its spread around the eastern Mediterranean, was then taken to Rome by Paul and Peter. But it wasn't until the Christian Constantine became emperor, having seen a sundog before his victory at the Milvian Bridge, that it became the official religion of the Roman Empire. Christian art begins before that, in the time of the persecutions, in the Christian tombs, in the catacombs in Rome. Some used cryptic Christian symbols like the fish to represent the Greek word for fish, ichthos, an abbreviation of Jesus Christus, or Jesus Christ, Theos, Son of God. That would be used sometimes along with bread to represent the story of the feeding of the 5,000. Other symbols included a shepherd to represent Christ, or a grapevine to represent the Eucharist. Other images include Adam and Eve, Jonah and the whale, baptisms, Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego in the furnace. This image on the right is of Jesus, with the Greek letters Alpha and Omega, the first and the last, referred to in Revelation 22:13. After the Roman Empire became Christian, even though its capital had been moved under Constantine to Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, churches were built in Rome, in the style of the Roman basilica or hall. The best surviving example in Rome is perhaps the Basilica of Maxentius in Rome, or in Europe as a whole, the Basilica of Constantine in Trier. Of the churches that came from these basilica, Santa Sabina had an early decoration in the half dome of its apse, although the mosaic was redone as a fresco in the Renaissance. The Church of St. Clement is named after the first pope and was a rebuilding in the 11th century of an earlier 4th century church dedicated to the first pope, a martyr saint who was killed by being thrown overboard tied to an anchor. And this church was built upon an older Mithraic temple from the Roman period. Meanwhile, in Constantinople, in the 6th century, Emperor Justinian I ordered the building of this church of St. Sophia, in Greek, the language of the Eastern Empire, Hagia Sophia. In the West, Ravenna became the imperial capital, and here we can see the parallel development of the Byzantine style. Partially a result of the abstraction of the Tetrarchy, partly a response to iconoclastic elements in Christianity, the style rejects the naturalism of classicism and instead relies on symbolic forms such as a gold background to represent heaven, and relies on calm and hieratic poses to represent holiness. It was in the Eastern Empire that the battle between visual representation and the ban on holy images took place, stemming from arguments based on scripture and practicality. It's a debate that informs most religions at some time, as we'll see in Islam and Buddhism. Luckily for art, it was a debate won by the promoters of the use of art in the Christian religion. These images, taken from the Paris Psalter, or prayer book, which was written in the Eastern Empire in Greek, show the survival of classical forms. There were various renaissances before the Italian and Northern Renaissances of the 15th century, one in the court of Charlemagne at Aachen, and one in the Ottonian court, and it could be said then that the classical style never really went away. In any case, the disruption of the Islamic Empire caused movements of people, skills, and texts which re-engineered